Hi, in this video I would like to introduce you to the Data Visualization Checklist. The Data Visualization Checklist is a tool that you can use to evaluate the design of your data visualizations. It consists of a very handy set of 24 guidelines that you can keep in the back of your head whenever you are making a visualization. The checklist was designed and developed by Stephanie Evergreen, a Dataviz practitioner, expert, and book author from the United States, together with some other people. And you can find the checklist on her website, stephanieevergreen.com. You can also do a search online for Dataviz Checklist. It should pop up in the results. You can also find it at the URL that I'm showing here above. When you found the checklist, you end up on this page, and to get started you can click the big orange button here, the Rate My Visualization button, and this will take you to the actual checklist. This is an online tool, so it will guide you through the guidelines in your browser. The first thing that you need to do is upload the visualization that you want to evaluate. So I picked an example visualization made by Eurostat. You can see it here in the context of Twitter. It's a chart about greenhouse gas emissions in the third quarter of 21, and the emissions are broken down by economic sectors. I have downloaded this chart, and what I'm going to do now is select it and upload it to the data visualization checklist. After I've uploaded the file, I'll get a preview and I can get started with evaluating my visualization. For each of the 24 guidelines, you will get some help to evaluate the visualization. What you need to do is select one of the options for each guideline, and either a visualization fully met a guideline. In that case, you select fully met. Sometimes you have a visualization that is not fully meeting a guideline, then you can select partially met, and whenever a visualization design is violating a guideline, then you should select not met. Sometimes you have guidelines that are not applicable. So for each guideline you get the guideline itself, you get a description, and you also get some help in the form of this Show Me button that shows you where to look for specific elements in your visualization. And you also get some score and tips if you're not sure what option to pick. So let's get started with the evaluation of the example chart that I selected. The first guideline says that the title should be a 6 to 12 word title, which is just left justified in the upper left corner. And I think our visualization is meeting that guideline, but it also says that it shouldn't be a generic phrase. It should be a descriptive sentence that encapsulates the graph's finding or the so what. And I think here our chart is not doing a very good job. It just says greenhouse gas emissions by economic activity, which is not telling the reader why this chart is shown to them. I actually think that the tweet where I got the visualization from does a much better job there. It's comparing the third quarter of 21 with the third quarter of 2020. And there it says that you have a 6% increase, which is an interesting nugget of information, I think. So I'm going to go for partially met in this case. The second guideline says that the subtitle and annotations provide additional information. We have a little bit of information there as a subtitle. It says there that the units of the numbers are in million tons of CO2 equivalents. And yeah, we can give it fully met here. Text size is hierarchical and readable, which means that the titles should be in the biggest font, and then the subtitles, they should be bigger than labels, which are bigger than access labels, which are bigger than the source information. And I think the title is the biggest, but the subtitle or the units are, I think, slightly less in font size than the axis labels. And what definitely should be bigger are the labels in the legend. If I show you a bigger version of the chart, you can see that these are actually quite small. And within the context of the tweet, you cannot really read them. The font is too small. So I'm also going for partially matte here. Text should be horizontal. Here I'm also going to show you a bigger version of the chart. This is not the case for all text on the chart. You have the labels of the quarters repeated here at the bottom. They are not horizontal, they are vertical. So in this case I'm going to say not matte, because all text should be horizontal to be better legible. Data are labeled directly. This is about separate color legends, and in this case this is definitely not the case, because we have a separate legend. If the categories would be directly labeled with their name directly put on the chart, that would be an improvement for the legibility of the chart. In this case I'm going to say not matte. Labels are used sparingly. Focus attention by removing the redundancy. For example, in line charts, label every other year on an axis. Do not add numeric labels and use a y-axis scale. If we take a closer look, we especially on the x-axis we have a lot of labels. We have a label for each year, and on top of that we have additional labels for the quarters. So there's definitely some redundancy there. We don't have data labels on the chart, so there's no redundancy in the labels of the y-axis. So maybe we can give it partially matte. There's some redundancy there. Proportions are accurate, which means that you don't have breaks in scales and things like that. And for bar charts, the y-axis should start at 0, and I think we don't have issues there. So I can safely say that this is fully matte. Data are intentionally ordered. We have a timeline, so there's an inherent ordering there. We can also see from the coloring that there are groups of economic sector belonging together. So there was definitely some thought going into the ordering of things. So in this case, I'm going to say fully matte. Axis intervals are equidistant. This is especially important for time axis, but we don't have issues there either. So this is fully matte. The graph is two-dimensional. We have no 3D effects or things like that, so we can also say fully matte. The display is free from decoration. The graph is free from clip art or other illustrations used solely for decoration. Some graphics like icons can support interpretation. Here I'm going to show you the bigger version again. You can see that there is some illustration in the background. It's not very present, and I don't really think that it hinders interpretation, but the guidelines are quite strict in that sense. I'm going to say partially matte. Then we move into guidelines around color. The color scheme is intentional, so it should represent brand guidelines or other intentional choices. And I'm not totally sure, but I'm pretty convinced that the colors are coming from the Eurostat guidelines, style guidelines. And you can also see that they use different tints of the same color. So you have darker green and lighter green, and they have a meaning. Those sectors belong together. So I'm going to go for fully matte here. The color is used to highlight key patterns. Here I think there is no real highlighting. We have one sector that is standing out, which is the red category, representing households, greenhouse gas emissions from households. But it's not very stressed in this visualization. I don't think color is used to highlight key patterns. What could have been done, for example, was making all the bars a little bit transparent and then you would have the last bars not transparent, and comparing it to the third quarter of 2020, for example, then you would have color playing a role in highlighting important elements on the chart. But here we don't have that, so I say not met. Color is legible when printed in black and white. I think we have some issues here. From the preview, you can see that in the legend we have some darker grays and almost blacks. They all look very similar. This is very handy integrated into the checklist. You get a preview of how a chart looks like in black and white. And here I'm going to say not met, because printed in black and white, the chart is not working anymore. You can't identify the categories in the chart anymore. Red and green blindness, I think this was also supposed to give you a preview of how that looks like. We don't get that, but I can simulate that for you. I have here a nice app that can simulate different kinds of color blindness here. So let's see how the chart looks like. And you can already see that the green colors and the purple or pink colors are very alike, like the mining and electricity supply here at the bottom. They are not easy to tell apart. And for other kinds of color blindness, we also see that we end up with very similar colors. So in this case, we need to say that the colors are not colorblind safe, and we say not met. The text has sufficiently contrasts background, and you'll notice from the preview that the background is in a kind of light gray. We do have black text, so there isn't much of an issue, but of course contrast would be higher if we would have a white background. I'm going to say partially met here. Grid lines, if present, are muted. I think this is okay. We have these dotted lines, which are the grid lines. They are visually not too present, so I'm going to say fully met here. The graph does not have a border line. You can see from the preview there is no real border, but of course by giving it a background color, you implicitly also give a border to the visualization. And when we go to the source of this visualization, the actual page where this visualization is published, you can see that it isn't really blending nicely into the background because of the background color. And there is kind of a frame because of that background. So in this case, I'm also going to say, well, let's say partially met. There's no real border, but we have an implied border with the background. Axes do not have unnecessary tick marks or axis lines. We've discussed this before. If we look at the x-axis, we can see that there's a lot of repetition there. So I'm going to say, this is about lines. So it's about those tick marks here in between the lines. They are not really necessary. They can be removed. So I'm going to say not met. The graph has one horizontal and one vertical axis. I think we don't have an issue there, so we can say fully met. The graph highlights significant findings or conclusions. I think this is not the case. We already said that when we were discussing the title, but maybe this chart coming from Eurostat wasn't really meant to communicate findings. It was merely a representation of new data. So I'm going to say non-applicable because it's not Eurostat's role to interpret data. They are more an institution publishing the data. Interpretation should be done by scientists or by journalists. The type of graph is appropriate for the data. If we would say that the real message here is the comparison between the third quarter of 21 and 2020, then probably this is not the right visualization. You can see that the data goes all the way back to 2010, so that is not really ideal. There is also no real benefit, I think, in breaking the data down into these different economical sectors. So we can say partially met. It's not really a bad choice of chart type, but other types might have been more appropriate. The graph has an appropriate level of precision. This is about data labels not having too many significant digits. I don't think we have a problem here because we don't have any labels, so I'm going to say fully met. Then the last one, individual chart elements work together to reinforce the overarching takeaway message, and I think we can again say non-applicable because there is no real overarching message. It's merely a representation of data. So we went through the whole checklist. We can now take a look at our results. I'm clicking the button here at the bottom, and the checklist is now evaluating the score of the visualization. And you can see that we scored 25 points out of 44. So some 57%, not really good, but not too bad either. It says here great chart scored 85% or higher. So how could we get to 85%? If we scroll through the results here, we get all the guidelines that we have fully met. We get the ones that were partially met, and here of course you can start working on the design of your visualization. You'll get a list of things that you can work on, and of course we have the guidelines that were not met, and these are probably things in your design that you need to take a look at and make some edits in the design of your visualization. So that was a checklist, a very handy tool to quickly evaluate the design of your visualization. But as I mentioned, it is also a very nice set of guidelines to take into account or keep in the back of your head whenever you're making a visualization. And you'll notice that after using the guidelines a few times, you will apply those guidelines almost automatically in your designs. So what you can do at the end of the checking your visualization is copy the results URL. So each evaluation with the checklist gets its own dedicated page. So if I paste it here, you'll see that I end up at this page. You could use this to share your evaluation results with others, and you could have a discussion around the design of a visualization. So that was the Dataviz checklist. I hope that you see the value of the checklist and that you will use it in the design of your visualizations to improve the designs.